Great. So hi and welcome everyone. So today we have organized an event on digital consumer activism. My name is Roberta Discetti. I am a lecturer in business and management at Bournemouth University, and I am joined by Joanna Pollard, which is the chair of National Campaigner Committee, and I'm gonna let her introduce herself in a minute. Just gonna say again that the event is being recorded. So if you're happy with it being recorded, you can leave your camera on or you can leave your camera off. Is up to you. And so the presentation is going to be divided into parts. I'm going to start first by presenting some of my last research on digital consumer activism and fair trade, which is based on my PhD on consumer movement and fair trade towns in the UK. And then I'm gonna leave the floor to Joanna, who is going to present some of her latest campaign and development in digital consumer activism. And then we're gonna open the floor to debate and questions. So Joanna, would you like to say hi before we start?
Yes, hello everyone. I know quite a few of you already, and it's great to be presenting here tonight. So yeah, as Roberta said, I helped her out with the research for the paper that she's going to be presenting, and I've got some thoughts and ideas of myself around some of the digital activism that I've been involved in over the last 2 or 3 years, and how I think it can be a really important part of fair trade campaigning going forward.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Joanna. So I'm going to start sharing. We have a presentation and okay. So yes. Okay, I assume you can see it well. Okay, so the talk today, as I said, is about digital consumer activism and how it has been used within fair trade campaigns, specifically in the UK. And as I mentioned, this is based on my PhD, which I completed last year on fair trade towns in general. But I became quite interested in the digital side of activism and wanted to explore this dimension a little bit more. So I have structured today's session into 3 parts. First, I'm going to provide some details more generally about what is digital consumer activism, what are the key characteristics that the literature is outlining in terms of digital consumer activism. And then I'm going to talk about how it was used within fair trade campaigns. So looking at the past of the fair trade towns movement, last 20 years, how was digital consumer activism employed? And last part is about more like a provocative question about whether digital activism actually make a difference. We think so, and we're going to provide some ideas about that. So first part, as I said, just some definitions and some characteristics of digital consumer activism. So consumer activism more generally is a form of collective action that aims at transforming consumption and markets. This is a quite popular definition. And of course, consumer activism is not specific to fair trade. There are many other movements within the food industry or in all social movements really that are using social movement tactics and mobilization to change something about the way we produce and consume today and about how markets work. So we can think of community supported agriculture, eco-villages, social enterprises, plastic-free shops. There are many different forms of consumer activism. And I was specifically interested in how consumer movement, and specifically within the fair trade campaigns, have started to use digital tools to achieve this change in consumption and markets. So what is digital consumer activism in general? So it encompasses a lot of different tactics and mobilization forms. Of course, the most known one perhaps is online petitions, but there are actually many other forms that are usually used in this sphere. For example, culture jamming and cyber graffiti. I put some pictures here on the left. So when Activists distort corporate logos and use mainstream aesthetics to promote messages that are anti-consumerist, as in this case here, Coca-Cola and Starbucks. Other forms are hacktivism, domain squatting. These are more forms of adaptation of civil disobedience tactics to the online domain. Other forms are mobile applications for boycotts. So of course, we all know what boycott is. So it's the opposite of boycott. So buying something for its ethical credentials. And there are several applications available, boycott, Too Good To Go, etc. You might know them. And also more recently with the increasing popularity of TikTok, another form that literature is looking at is consumer video activism. So how consumers are promoting short videos to spur a reaction from targeted companies. So these are all the different forms that digital consumer activism includes today. And I was very interested in understanding how these were applied to the fair trade movement. And specifically, I also wanted to look at the characteristics of digital consumer activism within fair trade. And one of the key dimensions that literature is highlighting is this difference between in leadership between traditional movements and digital movements. So in traditional movements, there is a leadership that is quite defined. There is usually someone that is considered an expert activist, and leadership is quite structured. Whether in digital consumer movements, the roles are much more blurred, and the leadership is diffuse, horizontal, and these movements have been called as leaderful rather than leaderless. So leadership can arise from many different spaces and is diffuse and participative. So how were these tactics used within fair trade campaigns? This was one of the questions of my PhD research. And to address this question, I have used ethnographic methods. So ethnography is qualitative methods that looks at the online cultures and online communities, is usually the application of ethnographic methods to the study of online cultures and community. And so ethnography, of course, is the study and the observation of a phenomenon in its in the real world. And so ethnography is usually looking at the collective dimension of movements. So the meso level is not looking at the individual level of consumers or the macro level of economic systems, is looking at the collective meso levels. And so is a very useful method to study social movements, as in this case, digital movements. And of course, its main focus is the online dimension. So it was really a privileged method to explore how digital consumer activism was used in fair trade campaigns. And my unit of analysis is fair trade towns and communities. So this global movement that started in 2001 in the UK. I'm sure everyone in the room knows a lot about fair trade towns. So I'm not going to say a lot about this, just that this movement started in 2001. So at a time where digital tactics were not as prominent as they are today in social movements, especially with the pandemic context and the post-pandemic context that we're currently facing. So I thought this was a particularly interesting context to study digital tools, because it really could provide insights and cast new light on how digital methods and tactics arise in a movement, how they emerge, and how they can be successfully used. And well, this is just to show the relevance of fair trade in the context of broader social movements and digital movements. There are today over 2,000 fair trade towns in the world, and the map shows that they are mostly concentrated in Europe. Of course, they are also present in the US and in all continents, really. what kind of data I collected. So just very briefly, without going into too much technicalities, I collected different types of data. I started with online data or archival data from the Yahoo Fairtrade Town group that some of you might have used in the past or might know. And I have downloaded all the posts from the group. So from 2001, when the group was launched, until 2017, when the group became inactive and the debate shifted towards social media like Facebook and Twitter. And so I collected all the groups of all the posts from the online group, and I complemented this data with elicited data, so semi-structured interviews with the members of the National Campaigner Committee. And following that, with a snowballing approach, I also interviewed other campaigners that were involved both in the online group and in place-based campaigns. And lastly, of course, all ethnographic methods are usually employ heavily field notes. So I also used immersive field notes that documented my immersion in the online field. So the Yahoo group represented the key data set for this research. And I'm gonna say in a minute why this was so interesting and important, and why this type of space is quite different from the landscape that we are immersed today with social media, and how having a group really helped the movement to grow and to achieve some of its objectives. So this was the main data set, the Fairtrade Towns Yahoo group. And this is how the data set looked like. So I used the software to scrape all the posts, and I collected all the posts. Here you can see this is the raw data. Then I have cleansed the data and anonymized it and removed all formatting errors. So I had my online data set. And in terms of theoretical lenses, I used this relational and hybrid ontology. So this looks like very big words. What do I mean by that? Basically, this idea that in today's world, digital and physical spaces are so intertwined and so enmeshed that we need to study them together. So we cannot study digital activism without also taking into account traditional place-based activism, and also the other way around. So today, most activism has a digital component, and so we need to study these two phenomena together and really look at how they relate to each other, and how they are hybrid, as I will try to argue by the end of this presentation. So findings, I have identified several tactics that the movement employed throughout these years under examination, so these almost 20 years of the Fairtrade Towns movement. And I have called these tactics specialized tactics of digital consumer activism. So what I mean by that is that even though the activism that Fairtrade Towns were using, the tactics were digital in some cases, they were strongly linked with place-based and traditional activism. And this was one of the reasons why it was so successful in the long run. And the two tactics that I really wanted to focus on today are one that I called in-placing the digital space, and the second that I called materializing digital activism. And I'm going to explain them in detail, starting with the first one. So in placing the digital space basically means transforming a space into a place. So space in geographical literature is usually considered like a container that is quite generic, quite abstract. So it's a space where there are no meanings or affectivities or emotions associated to it. It's a quite general term. And usually when we traverse a digital space, we don't have a sense of belonging or community attached to that digital space. But when the movement used that Yahoo group, so Fairtrade Towns group, for many years, then that digital space became a digital place. So a place where activists and campaigners could feel a sense of belonging, a sense of communities, shared affectivities, and digital ties. So in this sense, this space became a digital place. And why does this matter? So beyond abstract term, this matters because all social movement literature highlights that for a movement to be successful, a movement needs to form a collective identity, needs to form bonds of solidarity, needs to form bonds of affectivity between members. And so when a space, like a digital space like the Yahoo group, provides the means to do so, so provides a safe space where campaigners and activists can share their experiences and form a sense of belonging, then this is providing the movement with a powerful tool for its momentum and for its ultimate success, which is collective identity. And in the case of Fairtrade towns, this collective identity was shaped around this idea of a continuation of the anti-slavery campaigns of the beginning of the late 1800s, so that were organized by British consumers to boycott slave trade. And so this was a type of identity that gave really a lot of momentum at the beginning of Fairtrade towns, and where the digital space that became a digital place of the Yahoo group really constituted an important moment. And so why does this matter if we apply this today, if we try to think at the future of Fairtrade campaigns? So I think this matters because social media do not afford the same opportunity to campaigners to develop this sense of belonging and community that a space, digital space like a Yahoo group, like a forum, afforded. So there needs to be more research on how social media maybe can foster this sense of belonging and community. But what is arising from this research is that really having a space that is a space where people can identify themselves to a point that it becomes a place. So a place connected to meanings, affectivities, and even memories, then really provides the movement with an opportunity to build momentum and collective identity. So this was the first tactic that I wanted to present. And the second tactic is, I called it Materializing Digital Activism. And here, these pictures are from Joanna campaign, and I'm not going to say a lot about that because I know she's also going to share some insight about that. But basically, this tactic is transforming digital activism into physical activism. So translating the digital dimension into physical dimension. So what do I mean by that? So this was visible especially in the context of the two latest campaign, in the case of Sainsbury's campaign 2017 and Nestle campaign in 2020, when both Sainsbury and Nestle decided to withdraw from the Fairtrade certification for tea, in the case of Sainsbury, for KitKat, for the case of Nestle. The Fairtrade Towns movement and Fairtrade campaigners more generally displayed a really interesting tactic. So they coupled online activism with traditional activism, and specifically they coupled online petitions with local campaigns. So they promoted an online petitions and they asked their networks and consumer supporters in general to sign these petitions. And then they used these online petitions to create a social mandate for them as campaigners to then go to local branches of Sainsbury's, or in the case of Nestle, in Nestle headquarters in York, and say, we have this type of support. Of course, that support was not physical, was not material, was coming from online signature, but still it created a social mandate for campaigners to go then to physical spaces of Sainsbury and Nestle headquarters to really show the support that they were having from the broad community. So this is what I call materializing digital activism. So this sense of translating the support that was coming online into a social mandate that then campaigners could use to put pressure on place-based on places like Sainsbury and Nestle headquarters. So this is the second tactic that I wanted to focus on. And this leads to the third and last part of this presentation, where I wanted to talk about whether digital activism actually makes a difference. And so one of the key critique that is usually moved to digital activism is that it is a token display of support for a cause. And this is called sometimes slacktivism. So this idea of supporting a cause with just maybe signing a petition or clicking or posting something without committing to a more meaningful contribution. So this is one of the broad critiques that is usually moved towards digital activism. And this happens is, of course, it's possible that people might sign a petition or might share content without a more meaningful commitment to the cause. But I think that this is not the most interesting aspect of digital activism. I think that digital activism has a lot to contribute in terms of political and social changes. And it has a lot to contribute, especially when it becomes hybrid with local mobilization. So this idea of hybrid consumer activism, where digital spaces and place-based campaign really interact, creating a positive circle, a loop circle of communication and coordination between place-based campaigns and online campaigns. So really, this idea of hybridizing online and place-based campaign. And I think this is where movements today have the most to gain in terms of digital activism. So of course, when digital activism is left to the digital sphere, probably it's more difficult to visualize its impact. But when it is materialized, as in the case of the campaign that we just mentioned, into physical and place-based activism, then it really has a potential to bring about social change. And I just wanted to conclude with this quote from Robert Kozinets, which is one of the key authors today working on consumer movement and consumer activism. And I'm just going to read it because I think it's really a nice passage. So he says, clicktivism is responding to the critique of clicktivism or slacktivism. And he says, clicktivist utopianism is the first step towards a change. It is not the final destination, but perhaps it is a prelude to a wider call for collective change. Collectivism, utopianism does not actually solve the world's problems or overturn capitalism. Instead, it offers a discursive space set apart from other activities, allowing anyone who is interested to play with and within the contradictions of contemporary social systems, such as consumer capitalism. Utopia is a method, and reducing utopianist discourse to pure catharsis ignores the role of imagination in planning personal and social change. And I really like this quote. I really like the idea of utopia being a method and digital activism maybe not solving the cause that is trying to address immediately, but representing a first step towards change, because it allows imagination. It allows setting up spaces where new discourses can be created and practiced, and then this can represent a first step towards change. This brings me to the end. So thank you a lot for listening. I'm going to stop share, and I'm going to give the floor to Joanna now. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberta. Yeah, that was really interesting, and I think there's lots of ideas in there that we can take forward. I'm going to start sharing my presentation now. So, as most of you know, I'm the chair of the Fairtrade National Campaigner Committee. I've actually only been doing that role for about a year. Before that, I was the coordinator for Fairtrade Yorkshire, and a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking to you about tonight is stuff that happened while I was coordinator for Fairtrade Yorkshire. This is what Fairtrade campaigning used to look like. Meeting up in this, it's not a church, it's an old church. This is the Spurriergate Centre in York, and we used to meet up. This is a Fairtrade Fortnight event that we had, and we invited all of the local councillors along, and we spoke to them about Fairtrade and got them to try some Fairtrade products, and it's the kind of thing that we're all familiar with from the last sort of 10, 15, 20 years of Fairtrade campaigning. But March 2020 happened, and suddenly we were all stuck in our houses. And now this is a bit more like what you would normally expect a Fairtrade campaigning event to look like. This is from last year's Wave of Hope, the G7. And this is actually, I think we did this at the Baths conference. So we got everyone together to do a wave virtually online, and all of these people were literally all over, not quite the world. I think they're all in the UK, but we've got Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and up and down England all represented, and everybody turned up, and we came together and we did this. And then what happened with the Wave of Hope is that we submitted it centrally, and it was projected onto a building at the G7. And so our collective action that we did online went specifically to the leaders of the G7 when they were in Cornwall. And this is part of what the pandemic has done for us. It's enabled this kind of thing. So we can't do so much of this, but we're doing quite a lot more of this. Fairtrade communities, as Roberta mentioned, at Garstang, which is not too far from me, where I'm sitting at the moment, that was the first Fairtrade town in the world back in 2001, and it's just had the 20-year anniversary. And 20 years of Fairtrade communities, and they've been looking more or less the same over the last 20 years. So the part of local, national, global action. Fairtrade Towns movement is about 2,000 strong globally, but over 450 of those are in the UK. So the UK is really, really significant in the international Fairtrade Towns movement. And some of you, I know Elaine certainly went to the Fairtrade Towns conference in Bristol, and we have one in Cardiff since then as well. So we are, as the UK campaigners, we're welcoming people from around the world to the UK to talk about the Fairtrade Towns movement, Fairtrade communities. And it's always worked because we have 5 clear goals that each Fairtrade town has to meet. You can tweak them a bit as a country, but basically we're all doing more or less the same thing. In the UK, it's all supported by the Fairtrade Foundation, and we have been using signage like the one that you can see there, Yorkshire as a Fairtrade region. I don't think we were supposed to put the white roads on there, but we did it anyway and nobody's told us off yet. We're moving away from regions and countries and counties and zones and boroughs and villages and all of that, and we are all now Fairtrade communities. And I think that's really important, and it's going to be even more important going forward. Fairtrade communities, the Fairtrade Foundation did some research in 2019 to find out just how important it was. 425 Fairtrade communities, 23,000 groups, and 500,000 followers on social media. I think that's really important. 500,000, that's a lot of people following those communities on social media. We've got reach. We can digitally get to places that we can't do in person, and that's really important. So 1.5 million people were reached by Fairtrade with 16,000 events. Now, obviously, this is pre-pandemic. So we're working together, and it's working, and it's hybrid. So some of it's events in person, and some of it's things that are happening online. And that, as Roberta's discussed with you, this has always been the case since right at the very beginning of the Fair Trade Towns movement in the UK. We've always had online presence and local events, but it's just been ramped up over the last couple of years. Now, we're in the process of changing the way fair trade communities look. So it's always been the 5 goals. You get your council resolution, you make sure you've got fair trade being sold in shops and cafes, and that's basically box ticking. You go around and you find the number of cafes and shops that you need for your community, and then you work out who's selling what. And then obviously media coverage, which is getting much harder for local media are in a bit of a crisis point, and this is something we're really struggling with. I was interviewed by Radio Merseyside last week, and I was interviewed by That's TV Lancashire, but none of the local papers has been in touch with me. And I suppose you give them a press release and they probably just print that because it's much easier and their time poor and what have you. So getting media press, unless you know somebody that works in your local media, that's harder. So you can get much easier directly to people who are interested, who are in your community, by using social media rather than traditional print media. Steering groups are problematic. I'm going to say it now. The biggest thing that people say to me is, how do we get people to come along to our meetings? There's huge numbers of younger people in particular who are really, really keen on ideas about changing the world, trade justice, climate change, fast fashion, lots and lots of really interesting things. What they don't want to do is sit on a Wednesday night when it's throwing it down in a dusty church hall. That's not of interest to them whatsoever. I've just had a look at Fairtrade London, which I know has a huge Twitter following. Nearly 10,000 people are following Fairtrade London on Twitter. They're not going to get 10,000 people coming to their meetings. So they've got much more reach if they sit and tweet to their followers than if they wait for people to turn up at one of their meetings. So that you've got to have that hybrid. And yes, nothing will get done if people aren't going to sit down together and make those decisions and do organise the events. So we do still need steering groups, but I wouldn't worry too much if your local group isn't attracting new members, because you may well have people who you can ask to do things, but who are not in a position to come along to your meetings. So the new system that we're going to be having for fair trade communities, when you renew your fair trade status, is based on 4 goals. And as you can see, they're much, much broader. It's much, much easier for you to be able to do what works for your community rather than it being imposed on you. So citizen action is basically things like lobbying your local politicians. This is where the council does come in, but businesses, and you can get them to, you know, if you can invite your MP to, if there's an APPG event for Fairtrade Fortnight, if you wanted to take part in the Climate Coalition's recent campaign to send a little green heart to your MP, you can do that sort of thing. You can talk to local businesses and councils about bringing in fair trade procurement. So that's your citizen action. Buying fair is fairly obvious. It's about talking to people about helping them understand why buying fair trade is better than not, why they should be choosing to buy fair trade when they see the mark in the supermarket, explaining the difference that fair trade makes, and helping businesses and consumers to become better consumers, to essentially to buy better, and if necessary to buy less. This is something that social media is very good at, that if actually you can encourage people to share the stories from fair trade, then that's the way that we encourage people to buy fair, which moves us on to the next one, which is learning and sharing. So an awful lot of fair trade campaigners are going into schools during Fairtrade Fortnight, which is absolutely brilliant. You go in and you explain to the kids what fair trade is. And obviously this event is a Bournemouth University event. So we've got universities up and down the country that are spreading the fair trade word to the students and making fair trade part of our lifelong learning experience. is really important, because actually the narrative around fair trade has shifted, and it shifts quite dramatically. So up until 2 or 3 years ago, it was about a living income. It was about making sure that people had enough to survive and to live on. And for various reasons, it became apparent that actually in a lot of places, there is a much more pressing threat, and that's climate change. Because anybody who relies on the land, for farmers and workers rely on the land, and if the land is not reliable, if what you were taught about how you farm and when you farm and when you can expect the rains to come, and how high up the mountain you can go when you're planting your coffee and all of those things, if you can't rely on that anymore, then that's a serious problem for you as a family, as a community, but also for us as the consumers of the goods that they're growing. So climate change became hugely important, and that, I think, is a really useful thing for us to be able to share with our networks, is why fair trade is related to climate change and how important that is. And part of that is building our movement. Now, building the movement involves putting yourselves out there, joining up with groups that you wouldn't necessarily think you would have anything in common with. Lancaster Fair Trade Group did a brilliant project last summer with their local RSPB group, and just working with people that you wouldn't imagine. And that was around climate change in it, but it's also, there's connections with lots and lots of wildlife charities, and also human rights charities, and also fast fashion organisations, and lots of different campaigns have resonance with fair trade. Building our movement isn't just about making fair trade a bigger movement, it's about making the campaign for a better world into a bigger movement. Really crucial. Some of the things that I've done in the past, I'm going to share with you now. I organised this, and I know Julie's on the call, and Julie will know exactly where this is. This is Trinity Market, just outside where she's got a shop. I worked with a group of volunteers from the City of Culture in 2017 from Hull, and we got 200 volunteers to put on green and black and blue t-shirts and make the fair trade mark. Now, we did this and it lasted about 15 minutes because it was meant to be a stunt. So it wasn't like, we did have an all-day market alongside it just to encourage people to come along, but the actual event itself lasted a very, very short time. But this image that was taken then back in October 2019 is still being used now by the Fairtrade Foundation when they do presentations. So if you've gone along to one of their presentations for Fairtrade Fortnight this year, you will have seen this image. And that's the thing, because we took this footage using a drone, we have shared it and shared it and shared it and shared it. And that digital image has had much longer lasting resonance than the time it took to take that photo. So that's where digital really enhances things. We've already mentioned the Nestlé campaign, the campaign to keep Kit Kat fair trade. On the day of action, which was the 1st of October 2020, we were trying to get I Stand With Farmers trending as a hashtag on Twitter. Worked out that it had, I think, 10 million impressions on that day. So just that one hashtag, just making sure everybody knew this is what you share, this is what you do, and just bringing in as many people as you can. So I was working with, as part of a coalition. So with Fairtrade Wales and the Scottish Fairtrade Forum, the NCC, which I wasn't on at the time, so but CAFOD and the NUS and lots of other people were intrinsic to the campaign right the way through. But then we were bringing in other people, and then other people just found it. So we had a mad weekend when people like Joanna, obviously, but she got people like Hugh Fernley-Whittingstall, and Tandy Newton, and all of those people helped get us over a particular threshold, and sitting and watching the signatures rack up on the Change.org petition was one of the most incredible weekends of my life. It was just up and up and up and up and up, unbelievable. A lot of those people hate Nestle, so they didn't sign it because they like fair trade, they signed it because they hate Nestle. But it gave me the opportunity, if they'd signed up to receive updates from my petition, it gave me the opportunity to tell them a bit more about fair trade and a bit more that they wouldn't necessarily have thought of if they were in it for different reasons. You open yourself up to, you know, 250,000 people are listening to you about why this is important, and you get, it's a real opportunity that I can't imagine the idea of speaking to 250,000 people in any other way, and there's absolutely no way it would have happened had it not for being for this petition being so easy to sign from or wherever you are in the world. This time last year, I was organising the Fairtrade Connections Community Arts Festival, and again that was all online, so it was 15 events over Zoom. We didn't know, when I started planning it, I had no idea whether we would be allowed to even have in-person events. I worked on the basis that we probably wouldn't, but that most people would probably want to be connecting online. And unusually, I wanted to do something that the Fairtrade Foundation couldn't do. So what I wanted was to give it an arts focus. So I was reaching out to poets and photographers and musicians and people who were not already in the space of fair trade, but using them and their connections as a lens through which we could talk about the message. So bringing people in from outside, celebrity chefs, you know, people who do crafting activities. We had a Bollywood dance workshop on the Saturday morning, which was wonderful. And all of these people who are just tangential to our movement, but who've got their own connections. It's really, really fantastic that you can bring them in. And it isn't too much of an imposition to ask somebody to come to an online event for an hour in the evening, but it just gives you the opportunity to talk to somebody that you wouldn't necessarily get the chance to talk to. This is this year's Choose the World You Want social media. So it's about, you're invited to our online event, and we've been using this to publicise this event. And the Fairtrade Foundation's really cottoned on to the idea that the vast majority of events are still, and I think even though we are allowed to meet up in person, it's cold and we don't always want to. So, and actually it's quite nice for us to be able to talk to people from all over the country and all over the world. One of the things you can do with social media is just come up with something that resonates. So veganuary has been a thing for a while, but it's actually only about 10 years, but everybody knows what veganuary is. And a couple of years ago, I started to thinking we need to do something like veganuary, but for fair trade. And February as a concept was born. And as soon as I say to people, like veganuary, February, they know what I'm talking about. So I decided this year I was going to really make it happen. And I emailed everybody I could think of in the fair trade world, all the brands, so people like Liberation Nuts, Tropical Whole Foods, Divine, Oxfam, Tony's Chocolonely, lots and lots of different brands, and just said, this is what I'm going to be doing. If you add this hashtag to your social media for the month of February, we've got Fairtrade Fortnight in there as well. See what we can do. And to my surprise, I started seeing these tweets popping up in German and French, and the Swiss Fair Trade organisations absolutely smashed it. They love the idea of February. All of their posts have got February on it, and it's been really, really successful. And so I'm so pleased, and hopefully, like veganuary, it'll be something that people adopt next year and in subsequent years. And it's actually quite a nice thing to do running up to Fairtrade Fortnight. It sort of gets people into the right frame of mind of thinking about fair trade. So this is the BAFTA Fairtrade Fortnight Challenge, which again is a social media challenge, and it's mainly aimed at BAFTA members. So they're the independent Fairtrade shops and suppliers, but we're encouraging anybody to use this. So it's a different theme every day. And it's basically just a way of sharing some of your favourite products, and particularly ones that people wouldn't necessarily think about. But actually, we've put the hashtags on the bottom, and it's a case of dip in, dip out. If this resonates with you, this is an opportunity for you as campaigning groups to use something that other people will be using, and it creates a sense of community. This is, I think, what we were talking about earlier. Fairtrade communities have always been geographical, but they're not. I'm a member of lots of different communities, and they're not all about where I live. They're about the hobbies that I've got. So I'm in Facebook groups for things like crochet, and so that there are people that you resonate with, and people that you want to be part of that aren't right next to you. And social media and digital activism really, really helps you to achieve that. But I think the best thing about moving digitally is we get to see more of these guys. So we can make it about the farmers. So we can go to a coffee farm in South America, Central America, and we can hear direct from the farmers and how they're being affected, and we can see it. So we don't need to fly a person halfway around the world to sit and talk to us, possibly in Spanish, that has to be then translated. We can hear direct from this person while they sit on their farm, and they can show us the issues that they're facing. So whether that's a cocoa farmer in Cote d'Ivoire who's really struggling with the way climate change is affecting them, and it means that we can hear from more of them. So obviously it's lovely when we have a producer tour and people get to meet them, but actually if you can put together a program of events like we have this Fairtrade Fortnight, I would say this Fairtrade Fortnight, you've probably been able to speak to maybe 20 different farmers direct and ask them questions. And that's really unusual, and it would never happen with in-person events. You're lucky if you get one, partly because of the way the Home Office is dealing with visas, but you're very lucky if you get to speak to one farmer per Fairtrade Fortnight. And online, we're much, much more privileged. We can hear their stories direct, and that's so important. So with climate action, we're collaborating. So we're working with groups like the Climate Coalition, and different coalitions come together and pull apart. But we can take what we like from their campaigns, and we don't have to do things. But Great Big Green Week is a really good idea, I think, for Fairtrade campaigners, because so much of what we do in the year is about Fortnight. Fortnight is always end of February, beginning of March, and sometimes some of it's half term, and sometimes there's comic relief, and sometimes it's Pancake Day, and there's lots of different pulls on our time. And actually, we might want to do something else at a different time of year. We've got World Fairtrade Day at the beginning of May, but that's only a day. And the focus of that is supposed to be more on WFTO's producers. So concentrating on our climate message 2 times a year. So we've got Great Big Green Week, and we've got Fairtrade Fortnight, and it gives you another bite at the cherry. So if you don't manage to achieve what you want to achieve in Fortnight, you can do something for Great Big Green Week, and it can be something different, and you can maybe work with somebody different, and you can put a different focus on it. So last year, I'd been running a program called How Green Is Your T-Shirt? And in Great Big Green Week, I put on a fashion show. It was supposed to be an in-person event, but people were really, really nervous. So in the end, it was online. So I live streamed it over the WFTO's Facebook page. And then I put together a video and a load of photos. And it's something that I'm using for campaigning on fashion time and time again. So the idea that it's, you know, that you've got another bite at the cherry and you can do something that isn't purely Fairtrade mark focused, I think that's really useful. Fashion Revolution Week gives us another idea. So that's always in April. It's always on the anniversary of the Rana Plaza collapse. And it's a different way of campaigning, but it's all to do with trade justice. It's all to do with supporting the farmers, workers and artisans around the world who really need us. And again, you can piggyback on other people's hashtags and other people's campaigns. Fashion Revolution is everywhere. There's one in Ukraine. They were tweeting the other day about, yeah, we're fine, but please support us. So every country's got its own Fashion Revolution group, and the ones in the UK are really good at promoting things. And so actually, if you as a group are running a social media campaign, and you want to get on the back of other people's campaigns, that's a good place to start. The two events that I've got coming up in Fairtrade Fortnight are with people that I've been working with for a while and never met. So Sandy Dougherty I've been working with for a number of years. So she did a cook along for me last year. She also did some work with me during Great Big Green Week, where we were promoting Fairtrade pulses. So she did a series of events then, and she's working with me on Thursday. She's going to share the recipe for the really chocolatey tart that she got a Hollywood handshake for when she was on Bake Off. And I've never met her, but I feel like I have, because we've had so many Zoom calls together and we've worked together for such a long time. So yeah, really supportive of Fairtrade, and somebody who I would never have been able to connect with were it not for people shooting us online. And the other organisation is Africa Niwa. So they're again based in Yorkshire, but it's an organisation that is grassroots and it's run by people from West Africa. And what we're doing this year is called Chocolate Has a Name. And it's a storytelling, and we've got poetry and we've got music, and there are interesting photographs, and the idea is it's based on the knowledge that the vast majority of children of cocoa farmers don't get to taste chocolate. So but also that cocoa farming is not that lucrative. So a lot of children are not aspiring to become cocoa farmers like their parents. So what we're going to do is we're going to teach them how to make chocolate. So we're going to set up a chocolate making workshop in a girls' school in the western region of Ghana, and the girls are going to learn how to make chocolate. They're going to learn to make it from not just from bean to bar, but from tree to bar. So they will chop the pods off the tree, they will dry and roast the cocoa pods, and then they will grind it and they will make chocolate, and then they will eat it and they will love it. And it's partly about helping them to connect to this really important crop that is growing all around them. It's partly helping them to understand what happens to that crop once it's been chopped down from the trees. But I think most importantly, it's partly about giving them sort of an entrepreneurial spirit, that this is a job that they can do. And it gives a different job to what's happening in cocoa in Ghana, because the vast majority of cocoa in Ghana gets chopped off the trees, dried, and then shipped out, and the chocolate is made elsewhere. And all of the processes involved with making that chocolate happen outside that country. And if you put that process that's quite skilled back into Ghana, then you keep much more of the value of that chocolate in Ghana. We're working with a chocolate maker based in Accra, and apparently when they set up, a lot of people were like, why what why would you have a chocolate making workshop in Ghana? It's not a thing. But they've been really successful, because chocolate's lovely, and why wouldn't you buy chocolate from your own? It's local fair trade, basically. It's the idea that you're supporting not only the farmers and workers that from a long way away, but if you're in Ghana and you've got the money, you're supporting your local farmers and your local chocolate makers, and the skilled jobs are staying in those countries. And as I say, I've never met these people. A lot of them are still based in West Africa. I am going to visit them in October to see how we're progressing with it. But it's really important to remember that we can make these connections and we can achieve fantastic things outside our geographical communities. So we can campaign on different things. We've talked about World Fair Trade Day being slightly different from Fairtrade Fortnight. So there's lots of different issues around fair trade, and anything that excites you, you can at understanding and learning from. So if you feel like you know enough already about one side of fair trade, there are lots of other things that you can learn about and spread the word. These are the 10 principles of fair trade, which is what both WFTO and BAFT's based on. So it's about the entire supply chain. So there's lots and lots of different things that we have to think about when a company wants to claim to be fair trade. Nestle never claimed to be fair trade. They had the fair trade mark on the Kit Kats because a certain percentage of what they were buying in terms of cocoa was made under fair trade circumstances, and they paid for it. They wanted to continue to buy that same chocolate but not pay the fair trade price and the fair trade premium. That was the issue that we had with them, is that they wanted the chocolate but they didn't. That's the difference, the fundamental difference between a fair trade organisation and somebody who is just using the fair trade mark. Very different way of looking at it. And these lovely ladies all work for a WFTO member out in Vietnam making bags. So what we're doing is we're choosing a fairer world. The theme of Fairtrade Fortnight is choose the world we want, and that's the world we want. So lots of people from all over the world coming together, planting trees, planting ideas, and spreading the knowledge and understanding of what fair trade is. So the future is ours if we stay connected. So we're being led by the farmers, workers and artisans and their stories. We're using their stories to help how important fair trade is. We need to move away from it being just about buying more stuff, because that's one of the things that puts people off. The idea that we're constantly asking them to keep buying things. We're not. We want people to buy into the idea that a better world is possible, and that will mean that they get less stuff for their money because they have to pay more. But it's the Vimes Boots Index, isn't it? If you buy better, you don't have to buy as often. We're all about collaborating, building partnerships. It's always been really important to me that fair trade is about solidarity. If you stand up for farmers and workers around the world, then you have a right to expect other people to stand up for you when you need it. And this is where we are at the moment. I should imagine there are people in Ukraine who didn't imagine that they would ever need the form of solidarity that they're having now. But we're stepping to the plate and we're saying, you know, we're going to back you, we're going to support you. We want to change the world. It's that's our ambition. The world is not good enough. It's not working for so many of us, and it's so important. Fair trade is part of it. It's about building towards something that is better than what we had before. And the pandemic has given us an opportunity to think about that. What do we actually want from a global trading system? What do we want for ourselves? Lots of people want to be slacktivists, they want to be clicktivists, they want to get an email, sign a petition, and that's that. And we shouldn't be criticising people who want to do that. Most of the 10,000 people that are following Fairtrade London on Twitter, that's as far as they'll get. You know, they'll choose a Fairtrade option in the supermarket and they'll sign a petition. Those things add up. It absolutely all adds up. There'll be people that don't want to go on demonstrations, but they want to sit at home crocheting something to hang on a tree in a craftivist act. That's fine as well. There are people for whom the fair trade mark is absolutely the only important thing, and that's all they want to campaign on. that's fine as well. But there'll be people who want to look at the systemic problems with fashion and with mining and with all of the other things that aren't necessarily covered by the Fairtrade mark, and that's fine as well. There are people who want to go and stand with Extinction Rebellion. There are people that want to glue themselves to the M25. That's all fine as well. But we need to help each other to campaign however we want to. And as Fairtrade communities groups, that kind of empowerment is really powerful. Making sure that we are kind to each other and we are not criticising each other. That's really, really important. We're coming out of the pandemic. We're not there yet, but we're coming out, and we're going to have to build back fairer. We're going to have to do it together, and we're all going to have to choose the world that we want. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. It was really great to see in practice all the dynamics that I was talking about in the first parts of this evening, and then to see really in practice how they were happening in like the online festival, the green t-shirt program, all those dynamics about collective identities, and also this idea that fair trade communities are not geographical communities anymore. They are communities that are brought together by digital dimensions. And so, yeah, this really gives a different perspective of what a fair trade community is. So thank you so much. I think we still have some time for some questions and comments, and I've seen already some comments coming up on the chat. I don't know if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask it directly, it's fine. Otherwise, there is Elaine asking, well, this is more of a comment really, saying that yes, there are real benefits to online events and they are so much more accessible. And yes, this is basically
it's really what Joanna went on to say.
Yes.
she
Yeah.
said it much better. I put it in
Yes.
at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And even this evening would have not been possible without Zoom and online events. Even me and Joanna, we've never met in person actually, but we've been working together on different things.
But also that comment,
now.
oh, sorry, but also that comment you made, Joanna, about how that picture can be used for years. But this recording, you know, I mean, there was an event I was hoping to go to on Monday, one of the events during the Fortnight, and I couldn't. And I was really disappointed. And I said, oh, I hope you did a recording. They went, yeah, of course we did a recording. We'll get it up soon. You know, and that, you know, people can go back to that recording for, you know, for a few years, so it's still relevant. So.
I think there is just a question probably in the chat by Julie saying, I noticed that the fair trade mark is used by the Cocoa Alliance, which is on the back of Cadbury wrappers. Yes, I'm not sure. Maybe Joanna, you know better how to address this.
Cadbury's is an interesting one because Cadbury's has got this its own cocoa plan, but it's backed by fair trade. So Cadbury's did have a few brands that were fair trade in the same way as Nestle did, and what the conclusion they came to was that actually they really liked what Fairtrade were doing in terms of the independent monitoring, but they wanted to do things in a slightly different way, largely to do with the premium. One of the interesting things I found out quite recently is that if you are a Fairtrade licensee, you don't get to find out what they do with your premiums. So if you want to tell that story of we raised this amount of premium and it went on these projects, you can't, because it goes into a pot and then it's paid out again. So unless you sort of do a mass balance thing and think, well, actually, they've told us that this project cost 100,000 euros and we paid 100,000 euros, so we'll claim that because this is the thing that our premiums. Unless you want to do something like that, it's really hard to know. So I can understand why brands would want to be able to facilitate their own projects with the money that they're paying towards their communities. Obviously, it's much better from our point of view if they use the fair trade mark, whether it's the white mark, whether it's just the cocoa or the traditional fair trade mark. But the Cadbury's system is backed by fair trade and it's independently monitored by fair trade. And that I think is important. So it's not a sort of raise it to the ground and start again project. It is building on the relationship that Cadbury's already have. But it's about the whole of their system. So instead of just buying a certain amount of fair trade and all the rest not really bothering about the ethics of, everything in Cadbury's system comes under their new. So actually, because of that, more farmers and workers benefit from it than would otherwise. They benefit, each one of them, to a slightly less extent. So it's a case of whichever you think is better. Obviously, we would all prefer it if all of the Cadbury stuff was all fair trade in the same way as a lot of the brands do, but they're not there yet. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth encouraging them to move towards that.
Thank you, Joanna.
I have a question. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Hi, Billy.
Really curious, really interesting presentation. I appreciate you guys sharing this with all of us. You know, we're looking, obviously, we've all shifted digitally more and more during the pandemic. Really interested in that slide with the kind of original set of goals and the kind of the new approach, and wondering if there's been discussion about how that'll be measured or tracked at all. Right, every country, and right, so, and sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Billy. I'm the director of Fairtrade campaigns in the US, and I chair the global Fairtrade Town Steering Committee. So just wondering, you know, every country has some version of an annual report from each community, or you know, a survey or tracking on the website and those types of things. So just wondered what the conversations have been, Joanna, on how to track the activity or how to account for the movement, given that new framework that you shared.
Yeah, so the Fairtrade communities at the moment, we renew every 2 years, and when we renew our Fairtrade status, we have to fill out a form. That will happen. It will happen every 3 years rather than every 2 years, and it will be a narrative structure. We will be asking the communities to essentially focus on at least 2 of those 4 goals, because some communities will only be able to do a little bit of 1 or 2 of them, but they'll be really good at a lot of them. So I did a workshop with one of my local groups last month, and they've been in existence for 20 years and they were getting really tired of doing the same things over and over again. So I took them back to first principles. And it was these little cards, each of which has got one of the goals on. And essentially we had a lot of post-it notes, and I was like, right, what can you do for this goal as a group? Who do you personally know that we can get involved in this? And it became clear that 3 of them they were going to be quite good at, 1 they were going to struggle. So actually I said, right, we'll concentrate on those 3 for the next couple of years until you renew, and then we'll try and build up the 4th and see if there's opportunities. But I think where communities are struggling, it's really important to support them to do what they're capable of, and not to sort of try and push them to go too far out of their comfort zone.
Thanks.
I think, Billy, it would be really great, maybe this is a discussion for another event, to hear also from the approach in the US, because I think in the US the campaign is quite different and probably younger. You have a lot of universities leading the way. So I think it would be really great, maybe for another time, to hear what's happening there and how, yes, the universities are leading the way into digital campaigns. And I think maybe it's something, we can think of for next time.
Yeah, I would really be interested in being able to do that. I had a meeting with Mariana from Media, the first Fairtrade town in the US, a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, because she's working on the Chocolate Has a Name project with me. I think
we'd be happy to. And if folks are interested in that, in the meantime, from the International Fairtrade Towns Conference that was held virtually and hosted by Switzerland this past fall in 2021. There's a bunch of sessions. There was a lot around centering youth leadership and Fairtrade universities. My colleague Taryn, who's on the call here as well, helped lead one of the university sessions. So there's also some good content there on Fairtrade Switzerland's website, or I'm sorry, their YouTube channel, where you can see some of that stuff in the interim. But I'd be happy to talk about that, Roberta.
Thank you so much. I'm
Yeah.
going to check the content, and maybe we can have a chat about that in the future. It would be really interesting also to compare the different approaches. I think we have a couple of questions more. So there is Fran who is saying making connection is key. We might need a bit of help making the most of digital communication platforms. And I think, yes, this probably should be a focus for like training workshops and moments, really to share all the amazing skills, Joanna, you have when you come up with this campaign. But yes, how do we make it more inclusive in all like Fairtrade communities? I think probably that would be a good question for future events as well. And then Matthew, hi Matthew. So he's asking, I'm interested in opportunities for collaboration with farmers and workers. Matthew, did you want to maybe share the question yourself? Hi.
Hi. Yeah, really great presentation. Thank you both. I wonder if I'm being a bit overly optimistic or naive, but I just wonder if there's a possibility of a different starting point. So using social media and digital activism, can we use the campaigns of farmers and trade unions in the Global South as a starting point for our campaigns? So we amplify their voices, their kind of struggles they're having with brands. We saw a lot of this during COVID, and I think we see it with Fashion Revolution. This starting to happen. But I don't think there was, if we look at India, that there wasn't that much activism or support in support of the farmers' protests in India. So there's a kind of a bit of a tension. But yeah, I'm not sure if there's maybe more of a comment than a question. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. So for those of you, I think Matthew is my PhD supervisor, so he's listened to my research a million times now. So thank you so much for listening to it again tonight. And yeah, I think there are, I mean, probably I'm being naive as well and overly optimistic, but I think there are huge opportunities for digital campaigns to link people in different places, and many examples that Joanna was presenting are going in this direction. So I think probably my only comment would be really trying to keep these collaborations on the level of partnerships rather than more an approach where there is like capability and training, because that is like always unidirectional, and I think we need to probably move beyond this type of language, but having instead partnerships where, as you said, Matthew, cooperatives and union from the South are leading the way of global campaigns. There are opportunities for us to get involved. So
yeah, I think that's really important. We had discussions at the York Fair Trade Forum about the possibility of partnering with a cooperative in Peru, which obviously there's a language barrier there for most of us. But the biggest issue was that they felt that the thing that they wanted was somebody to sell their products. And we weren't in a position to do that for them. So actually, I think the usefulness of partnering with people, both sides need to understand what their role is, and they need to understand what they can and can't do, because the last thing that we as campaigners would want to do would be to promise something that we can't deliver. And so actually, yes, we can try and increase the market for products, but if it's about workers, if all they want to do is to help us to tell their stories and help us to amplify their voices, we can absolutely do that. But it's very difficult for individual fair trade communities to have a financial impact on people, and that's what's needed really. We need that to be, we need to put pressure on the people who can make those decisions.
thank you, Joanna. I think there was another question. Maureen raised her hands before. I don't know, Maureen, if you still want to ask your question.
Yeah, Joanna, Roberta, thank you so much for
Hi.
this wonderful presentation. So, Joanna, I was just wondering, you talked about a lot about Ghana. So I'm looking at it from a West African perspective, because Ghana, though the major producer of cocoa, there are other smaller West African countries that do that. So I was just wondering, two questions really. First, is there a way trade fair is expanding to other West African nations, as it were? And secondly, I'm thinking, it goes back to what Roberta's work is about, digital activism. And some of the West African countries, we don't have digital, as it were, enough that is reaching those, hard to reach regions. So what are some of the challenges perhaps you guys have been facing, in targeting this other, maybe not major cocoa producers, but minority producers, because their plight also needs to be taken into consideration, especially the farmers, as it were. So I'm just interested what the work is there to reach other West African nations, and what sort of limitations, perhaps the Fairtrade body is, facing getting themselves to those sort of hard to reach region. I know we've talked about how, maybe next time, but I would just like to hear what, at least for the first instance, what you guys are doing in this aspect. Sorry.
Yes, so that would be the majority of what you're talking about. There would be Fairtrade Africa, and they're a fantastic organisation. They're a sort of body that oversees the African producers and consumers, because we have local fair trade in places like South Africa and Kenya, and so Fairtrade Africa would support producers in lots of different countries, and there are fair trade producers. The ones I was speaking to for the Kit Kat campaign were in Cote d'Ivoire, but with Sao Tome and Principe, for example, a very small island nation, they've got fair trade farmers for cocoa, and so it's not constrained by geography. It might be constrained by politics in the individual countries. There are some countries that are much more favourable towards fair trade. So Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, both of those governments often work together because what we don't want is Ghanaian and Ivorian farmers in competition with each other for the same fair trade customers. So the governments of the two big nations do work together, and they will set a minimum price every year, of which the fair trade minimum is always higher because of the premium. So, but certainly the smaller nations are absolutely part of the mix, and you can get some really nice, interesting tasting. Because the thing about chocolate is that it's got terroir like wine does, so you can taste. If you talk to an Ivorian, they will tell you the best cocoa is from Cote d'Ivoire. And if you talk to a Ghanaian, the exact opposite. So they do actually taste slightly different, and that's why, the people are very sort of protective of their own sort of territory and the way the chocolate tastes. But yeah, it's absolutely all over that part of Africa, and Fairtrade is doing lots of really good work.
Can I also comment on Maureen's question? I think, Maureen, you're raising a really important point, because when we talk about digital activism, we're not talking about the digital dimension as a magical sphere where power inequalities are not existing anymore. So the digital dimension just reproduces power inequalities that are in place-based communities. So when you say cooperatives of farmers don't have access to internet, this is exactly what I mean. So there are power inequalities to address when thinking about how to make digital activism more inclusive. So I think, yes, this is a very important dimension to consider when thinking about opportunities for collaborations. Yeah, just a lateral comment.
And I think one of the interesting things is the rise of things like WhatsApp and Facebook, because a lot of people in pretty much the whole of Africa, they may not have access to Wi-Fi, but that they use digital data, and they will be able to be on their phones on WhatsApp and Facebook. Not necessarily all the time, so it's not particularly reliable in the same way as it's not that reliable here. You get patchy data, but I was having a a conversation with Bismarck, who's one of the sort of poster boys of fair trade cocoa farming, and he lives in Ghana, and we invited him to a Zoom meeting, and he said, well, it takes me an hour to get to a place where I can get on Zoom, because in his village he doesn't have the bandwidth to join a Zoom call, so he has to travel to be able to do that. So yes, it's not as simple as, oh, we can connect the world together, but it's getting better.
Thank you so much, John. It's always so
Thank you
inspiring.
very much, guys. Yeah, that helps.
Thank you. I'm just mindful of time, so probably we should be wrapping up, unless there is like a very, very final burning question. But I think both me and Joanna are really interested in these topics and keen on keep the debate going. So yes, I think probably also having further like research maybe on what's happening in the US would be really great. And I think really we already talked about this in the past, so maybe it's time for me to make that happen. So I really want to thank you, Joanna, for participating and sharing all the campaigns that you've been running in the past years, and really bring these very colorful examples of what digital activism can achieve in real life. And so also thank you all for participating. It was really great seeing you all here. And yes, probably that's it for me. I don't know, Joanna, if you want to say some goodbye.
Just thank you, Roberta, for organising this, and thanks to everyone for coming along. It's always a pleasure to speak to fair trade campaigners, and yeah, keep going and stay online, but also get out into your communities and campaign there as well.
Great. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a good evening or morning, afternoon, wherever you are. And yeah, see you soon.
Thank
you very much. Really interesting.